Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today is going to be a staccato-style talking stream. I'll be coming and going with different little things to say, and our theme for today is, I'm calling it balance, but it's much more complicated than that. It's that moment where you do something that isn't normally a good idea, because you need to do it so that your opponent doesn't think you're just going to do the safe and sensible thing every time and start beating you up for that.
Round one.
Which means that we have our usual suspects, or they'll be showing up fairly quickly within the timing. And that we won't necessarily be talking about anything if matches are particularly close, if the players are particularly even in skill, and so on. It's much more likely that we are going to be talking only if one person is having trouble opening up the other. So you can usually expect that the first round of a set, sometimes even the whole first match of a set, just won't have any speech in it. And that should be consistent enough that you can count on that. First round of a set, or first match entirely of a set, may not have any speech. Even if the two players have fought before and I have a fairly good idea, they might adapt or think of what to do between the matches, since they would be rotating around, and therefore I still won't say anything during the first round or match of the set. Obviously I'm taking that slot now to say all of this, and to go on to say that this is a character select on lobby today. 3 rounds, first 2, functionally Atlantic Rim. You should expect your best connection in terms of people who you can play against to be southern area of the United States and the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in that way. If you have really good internet, you can try from the Midwest or Canada. But you can treat it as US East too if you're familiar with other games. We're not terribly fussy about lag, even the type that can cause you to lose on tight execution. But of course, if it gets stuttery to the point of not being able to see what's going on, we'll of course request that you either only fight people who don't have that problem, or just leave. We don't normally like to kick people because we don't know if they're both having the same experience, but if it gets bad enough, don't be surprised. You're going to see possibly a lot of Cammy today if Milk Muncher stays around. Or because of various reasons, Kazuki Dynasty is probably playing not Kareen today, and not Kareen, depending on her mood, normally goes straight to Cammy, at least for the test of whether or not that's the best person to be playing. Cammy is a relatively good demonstration character for this though, because Cammy spends a lot of time trying to make people do things so that she can hit them.
Final round.
She has no overhead. Even her dive kick doesn't actually hit if you're crouching. If you're crouch blocking, you won't get hit by it. Her other moves are relatively slower, crouching avoids some particular ones, etc. So, from the Cammy player's perspective, you have a lot of work to do. So, it's entirely possible we'll see the Cammy mirror match at the end of this one. but it is still possible for the wolf to make it back from here because of what I mentioned. Oh, no, but there's the jump, and it was enough damage to get it done. So,
Cammy wins.
so let's see how this goes, but as I said, beginning, not going to get me talking for a while.
Cammy.
I'll be on guard. For those who I wish to protect.
Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight.
We're already seeing a good demonstration of the thing in question. Hitting raw spiral arrow in neutral, generally not a great idea, but can definitely have that moment where you get the knockdown, and it's a worthwhile knockdown. It gets you at least some pressure. In fact, many people at the higher levels consider this sort of thing, being hit by that move, to be not really a dangerous mix-up, but you definitely have to think about certain things. In general, Cammy can at least get close enough to you to get a throw, and you have to tech the throw, and she's kind of advantaged against most characters after a throw tech. But other things we've seen, Hooligan combination in specific spaces, cannon spikes at times that are risky, but the payoff is good if you actually predicted your opponent correctly, especially if you had enough health. And a lot of maneuvering that's helping quite a bit. It's also a really good start because a mirror match is exactly the place where you need this sort of thing. Your opponent already knows most of the tricks, probably. If you're of similar level and you've played enough, even if they don't have that character as their main, they probably still know the tricks. Or they might not be willing to play the character as a generality. So if they know the tricks that you know, you'll have to decide quickly what their mental state is so that you can do something else. Or do the same thing you always do because you've convinced them that you might try something else. And that's the big important part. So how do you balance doing crazy stuff with doing the standard stuff that is standard because it's good. We do the standard things because it's among the safest or highest payoff things that our character can do. But we obviously also have other tools that can have good payoff in themselves, sometimes better, but are much riskier to pull off. If you can get your opponent to not care, oh, this is also one of those points where we talk about you've won already because your opponent doesn't have any options. Generally, this sort of person counts as annoying for us, but it is kind of who she needed to practice on. And it's 30 seconds left. If they want to keep this up for 30 seconds, that's fine. Normally, this is even better because it implies that your opponent has become so interested in winning or defeating you in particular that they probably have shown their hand that they believe you're better than them. Sometimes if you have a really big life lead, it's still worth doing, i.e. the one with the life lead running away, but if you have no life lead and continually push to believe, or push to indicate, well, my opponent's going to make a mistake eventually, right, and then I can get them, you've probably indicated to them that you think they're better than you. Whether or not that's actually true doesn't necessarily matter, but it's often a bad sign when you've had to run away from your opponent multiple times, because the chances of this working on most people at this level is sort of decent, but so many people of this type play this way that you can't really be sure that just because a person has played offensively for so long in a match that they're the type that rushes into making errors. In fact, they might just let you do that. And it looks like they dropped 2 back for whatever reason. Okay.
Let's do this. Round 1. Round 2. Fight. Holly wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Seth wins. Round one. Fight!
Alright then, less to say here. Because of exactly what I said, these players don't really spend that much time working on the opening up part, but we are seeing a little of it now, so I'm starting to kick in. Opening Seth up isn't necessarily hard. Seth players tend to be a little bit more defensive when they're forced to be on defense, because Seth doesn't actually have a lot of great normals for filling the gaps between other people's. One of the character's main weaknesses, honestly. Forcing you to get a lot of wake up mad cradle in bad situations, or even just out of pressure strength, since it does reach far enough forward for this, is why we consistently suggest expect that you can bait Seth into doing uppercut more often, such as in that situation. The player, even subconsciously, might not want to get locked into that situation where you get to keep on hitting buttons, but Seth doesn't really have rewarding buttons to hit. So, especially if you feel as if by baiting long enough, you might get something, you might as well. It's important to think about this, in fact, because even though pressure might be more useful, you should consider this character almost pressure-proof. They're not going to usually hit crouch like punch or crouch like kick or whatever to get themselves out of bad situations on block. They're going to uppercut or block, which means you should probably block yourself. From the Seth side, therefore, as you get higher in level, and you know people will do this, that's when you do actually get to start pressing a couple of buttons. But you don't generally want to do this too much, unlike other characters where you definitely get something out of this. A lot of the time, particularly depending on the meters available, this will end really, really poorly for you.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
Even more Cammy today. A good choice. These players have faced each other before. And anyone who's watched our streams generally knows that Cosmo tends to play defensively more often than most of the other team members. Generally it's just that's the style. However, Cammy is better at chasing in particular ways and taking advantage of specific ways in which the defensiveness comes out.
Final round.
The amount of position left open, for example, can be used. If one is on a defensive tack altogether but expects Cammy to come forward, Nikali has a lot of options. If you're not sure how you expect this to happen, less often functional. Fortunately, Cammy's a fairly straightforward character. She doesn't have that many options for doing this. And once Nikali has V-Trigger, even though now it does wear off after a while, he has enough mobility to take advantage of the space created between the characters if Cammy decides to move. We're already seeing Cammy playing in the proper way of, I think you're going to come forward, I'm going to jump. We're at that range. But because Cosmo plays a lot more sedately and doesn't actually always come forward, it's more so a matter of defense at that point. And if the defense works, or if the decision is to walk back, then it just flows naturally. The Cammy does get to jump, but nothing particular happens. But the jump is in itself what most people would consider a bad idea. But you have to keep jumping, or the Nikali player will get to focus entirely on the ground game, get to consider what to do, and you're done. There's the upgrade to that V-Trigger really helping out. It's hard to explain exactly how to use that. So far I think I'm not even sure myself, but yes, there is now a hit on the way up of that attack, and you can use it for anti-airs. Generally you use it for zoning jump anti-airs because Nikali does not seem to extend a hurt box particularly far forward. Fortunately, Nikali actually has decent enough defense that even if you don't have the skills to get big damage off every punish, you're more likely to be calm and not stressed out about the fact that you didn't, because you have to hit the same button either way. Your good button for punishes and your good button for checking your opponent are basically the same, so you don't end up stressed. Characters who have vastly different good combo versus good check buttons are often in trouble.
Cammy wins. Round one. Fight!
This is one of the hardest things to get used to in fighting games, that your decision making and your understanding can be quite good, but your ability, your execution and so on, practice is a thing you need. And obviously, with our content we aim to offer both. Bots are there to help you both practice the responses and some of the decision making. But you gotta remember that these games are usually complex. They're not meant to be learned in a short time. They're meant to give you a lot of experiences that you can continue to have, high replayability and all that. But unfortunately, for people who are easily discouraged, a large part of that replayability is in the fact that you aren't perfect enough at things. Capcom is really used to making this type of game, so it's not surprising it comes out in their fighting games. If you played Mega Man, if you played Monster Hunter,
Round two.
if you played Resident Evil, they're all very replayable because you could do better. Fortunately, most of them also have some setting where you're not terribly discouraged from being yourself in various ways. You just lose out over time. Or rather, I should say you lose out on time. And that's what fighting games also are. If you want to be able to master these games quickly without a large time investment, you're probably not going to have much success there. Your best bet is to try to make it as fun as possible. Hopefully fighting bots is fun for others. We tend to find it most enjoyable. Probably more so than fighting people a lot of the time. But that's an emotional thing that comes up because people hate to lose and will react certain ways when put in the situation where they might. Fortunately, we don't really worry about that for this player. They are generally confident, relatively high octane, and will not generally just go, well, I seem to be losing, let me change my entire style and shut down. If anything, they're the one who ends up slightly frustrated on the other side. But here we go, that is a big hit. And another situation where it's more so a good idea, I think you're going to do something, and it worked out really well.
Cammy wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
I'll be on guard.
Cammy
I'll be on guard.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
Like I said, high octane and pushing in both directions, honestly. I was thinking that given the characters they normally play, I wasn't going to end up getting to talk in this match, but the Cammy Mirror again helps with the theme of the stream. Perfect sweep. Have enough health to go for the sweep, get a big hit if the sweep works. Crouch medium kick might have also worked, but you know. There's even under that, there's tiny reasons why hitting the sweep would be better, things to do with trades, and so on. Those sorts of decisions are usually the type you make very quickly, or they aren't really decisions at all, it's just something you've built up. You think about it for a long time and your brain just subconsciously does the rest, corrects it. Probably good to go for the damage here, since Cammy doesn't really benefit that much from her meter, and getting back closer to parity in terms of health was probably best. Even when you know you're playing against someone like this, you should still make at least some decisions as if you're playing against someone who might run from you. Because even if your opponent normally won't try to back off constantly, they might decide to do it for a moment, they might try to catch their breath, they might see it as the best way to get through this particular thing while maintaining their mental state. And this is also partially why you can't always blame people in rank for playing like that sometimes. If you were particularly intimidating or stressful, they don't have a chance to go, okay, wait, let me learn something about this, or let me learn something about you. It's ranked. They're going to do what they can to get to the next match. I don't have anything in particular to say about people who do it in the last match of the set. Believe it or not, it was probably better to spend that meter. Again, not because of this enemy, because Cammy, you probably could have gotten the kill another way. Other characters, it can actually be kind of suspicious whether or not you will make it. And there's few things worse than that.
You win! Round one. Fight!
This match, for example, is absolutely the type where if one of these players were to suddenly start playing really defensively, they would also probably start to lose. They're both constantly trying to outmaneuver each other, come up with more creative and interesting strategies for offense. And one easy counter to this is to just, you know, sit back and wait for them to mess up. Because some of the things they're doing are risky enough that they will turn into errors if you change your spacing even slightly. This is because of what they're doing is intended to defeat your movement. But this isn't always a great strategy. As you may see demonstrated some other spaces soon enough, deciding to go into defensive mode against someone who has this level of offense, or at least offensive awareness, means that you might find yourself in a situation where they just stop. They may either have the life lead or so many resources it doesn't matter, and just not care. And if they don't care, you'll get what we got at the end of the previous Cami Mirror. I'm just gonna walk you all the way to the corner. If you jump over my head, I'll walk you all the way back. Because I, as the offensive player, have already won. I have won because you are not able to necessarily keep up to do your own offense at the level required to prevent me from having mine. But if you switch to defensive mode, I just don't have to use mine. If you are an offensive player yourself, you can use this sort of thing to make your opponent go on the defensive long enough to get to try your own offense. But it's often more fun to just do this sort of thing and see who can outmaneuver the other. If that's not your style of play, just be aware that you might not be getting what you think you're getting if you try to go full defense. But that was pretty close in all cases, and I think it was more or less the same ending. Specifically that jump that was probably looked like it was going to be a dive kick or something that was then realized, okay, I don't need to dive kick here, let me just land and block. That's a whole interaction that isn't necessarily luck. Both players might be thinking about that specifically.
Let's do this.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Round one. Cammy wins. Round one. Fight!
Spiral arrow! Spiral arrow!
Round two. Fight!
That was a very raw attack. Playing Carrion very offensively can be harder because your options in terms of what to do tend to be less safe and less evasive. Which leads us around to this outcome, I guess. But this could be a mindset thing, it could be a practice thing. There's no way to know specifically because we don't really see this player play this character that often. At least I don't. I think I remember this Ken. I don't remember if they were... No, I don't remember enough about this Ken to say. But we're back around to pretty much where we started.
Round one. Round two. Fight!
Karine is a character that is, for this character, fortunately, depending on their goals, or unfortunately, depending on their wish to win, a character that you don't always have to know the player very well. She is very skill-based, but she's also relatively linear in terms of it's harder for two people to play Karine's macro strategy differently. It mostly comes down to where they are on the slider of offense versus defense.
Final round.
And their choice of V-trigger, but most people pick V-trigger one because it's more output. What it means for this current player though is that, yeah, everyone in this lounge has a lot of Karine experience, so it's not necessarily going to be easy to do a lot. She doesn't have a whole lot of really complex trickery she can do, and she doesn't have enough safe moves that you can be pressured with, except probably Orochi. So here we have the situation come up again. I'm backing off, I'm catching my breath, but it's not necessarily enough because again, players are not only used to the character, they're used to the idea of fighting people who have to do this, making it kind of hard to break through.
Nekali wins.
If I had to suggest something, it would probably be looking for those moments where Orochi will work. But Orochi isn't necessarily a great plan against Nekali because Nekali will just hit his check you buttons and push her back out to what is often an unfavorable space. You can't necessarily force Nekali players to feel like they need to defend either, so empty Seppo won't necessarily help. If anything, you're going to see the same thing you saw many streams. Karine looking for openings where Nekali makes a mistake and jumping at the right time when Nekali is likely to launch an attack in order to get the cross-up and the resulting damage. But they seem to have a good idea of when that jump needs to happen. And the Orochi cancels required, so looks like we may see some adaptation toward the Nekali matchup from the Karine side, which is going to put the stress on DeWolf to actually do all of the mental things, the execution, the spacings required to just defeat the core Karine strategy. But don't expect to see something terribly different than what you normally see, because it's not likely to be there. Yep, even that.
Karine wins.
A lot of what Karine does at higher levels is based on her timing for whiff punishes and similar, setting them up, and basically controlling the opponent in footsies. If they refuse to be controlled in footsies, the two Karine players placed up against that type of player will usually end up looking the same over time.
Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Mish-Mashing wins.
Perfectly done. They went straight into absolute calm mode.
It's go time.
And that leads us around.
Let's do this.
I'll be on guard. I'll be on guard. For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you. For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round one. Fight.
Here. Here. Armsy. Here. Drop. Take it. Fight. Fight.
Round two. Fight.
Armsy cannon strike. 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 Fight here. Fight. Fight. Spinning. Oh here. 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 Fight. Armsy cannon strike. Spinning it. Armsy cannon strike. Here. Fight. Cannon strike. Fight. Armsy cannon.
KO. Final round. Fight.
Armsy.
You win. Round one. Fight. Round 2. Fight!
Spiral arrow! Fight! Spiral arrow! Fight! Spiral arrow! Auntie! Drop! Spiral arrow! Cannon spike! Auntie!
KO! You lose. Round 1.
If anything, what both these players seem to need is a little less mental commitment on their hooligan combination. It often messes players up when they have a move that has two parts, because they'll do what they intended to do at the beginning of the move. It's better to see if you can let go a little bit sometimes and make the decision partway through properly, because this means that your opponent can't predict you as easily. Now, this doesn't necessarily work if your opponent is particularly on the defensive, because with many moves, especially the hooligan combination, this gives them more time to react. And Cammy has a lot of good reactions to her own moves, you would think.
Round 2.
But it is still important to think about as a whole thing. If you have a move that has two parts, or you can do half and not the other half, or changes in some way, it's best if you don't give your opponent a specific concept that at this range you do this version of it, regardless of anything else. Now, of course, if you're expecting them to move, you can get more out of it by just going straight for it, because at that point you are specifically predicting a thing. But, as you see here, just sometimes doing empty hooligan to get the other side can be enough to get you somewhere. What is particularly helpful here is that you don't really lose much directly. You don't tend to take a ton of damage for doing the hooligan itself in the situation we're talking about. But that got a little frantic, yes. The mirror match doesn't seem to be something that either player is completely used to playing, or maybe they just really wanted to play it this way.
It's go time. Let's do this.
Be on guard.
Nash.
I'll show no mercy.
Round 1. Fight!
Sonic!
Auntie, cannon strike!
Not a chance. Sonic!
Auntie, Auntie, cannon strike!
One thing that can be harder at lower levels is
Round 2.
understanding that your opponent isn't necessarily playing defensively just because you keep getting countered after a specific scramble. It might more so be that your opponent knows that you are the sort of person who just immediately takes an action. You don't stop even to breathe or check meters or anything after scrambles. And this is usually bad because even an offensive player, that's just free damage. They might as well just wait for that moment for you to do whatever it is you're doing. Get their damage or knockdown and then continue their offense. Whereas most of the time, if you just do something immediately after a scramble, if their character doesn't have a lot of ways to win against that action type, they have no reason to do it. Like, win by acting before. But if they could easily defeat it on a defensive side, then sure, they'll just wait for you to make that particular mistake because you're going to, and move on from there. You see it a little bit here, and you can probably not see it anymore because they've shifted somewhat. But there was definitely a point where
I suggest you stay down.
Mish-Mashing took control of a situation and then was able to be relatively sure the opponent is either going to moonsault or jump right after, because that's just the interaction they have, and she can do any number of Cammy things to beat it, or she can just air throw. And people pick up on this really quickly, so be very careful about it. As always, we suggest the way to deal with this is, when you find yourself in that spot, check meters, because it gives you just about enough time to mentally reset yourself. And, you know, additional information never really hurts. This is particularly true against jumpy opponents. And why, if you want to improve at this and you think you're getting anti-aired a lot, that's probably the reason. Your opponent has won in exchange, and your thought is, I'm going to jump now because jumping will solve my problem. Or at least give them something else to think about. But they're usually thinking about the fact that you've jumped enough times that you're probably likely to jump again.
You win.
For characters like Nash, where you don't necessarily have the speed to make sure that Cammy can't just react to whatever you do, it can be trickier. Nash doesn't have a whole lot of options, and he doesn't necessarily walk all that fast, so the problem can't easily be resolved. He could go into full defensive mode, he could use some meter to get some advantages, but Cammy can punish a lot of stuff Nash does, even from fairly far away, so your best option is usually to use his mobility style movement, which in this case is like forward heavy punch, because even if they jump over it you don't always take that much damage, or forward light kick, because this can also get you through some bad situations sometimes. This is actually why our Nash bot is based around punishing or at least dealing with both of those moves. Because a Nash player who is often put into a bad situation will probably just defeat themselves if they keep jumping or trying to approach. And they'll corner themselves if they keep on backing away like this. You don't necessarily have to understand a lot about Nash as a character to win in this situation. It's the person who knows how to use other methods to move, get in, or set up situations for themselves that you have to worry about, and so we teach you how to deal with the tools that they use for those things. Even with Nash's various ways of dealing with these problems, it still gets really bad. But it seems like either there's some counter hit issues going on here, or our Cammy hasn't practiced Cammy combos in a while. Always remember that you must practice your combos against multiple characters because of something very specific in the game. It's quite lenient in terms of certain timings for combos under certain types of block stun. But when the block stun is different, you might hit the first button in your combo a little earlier than you're used to. The game will still register it, it'll still let the move out, but now your execution's like a frame off, sometimes up to 3 frames off, and things just don't work anymore.
You win.
Input buffers help out with this, but a lot of it has to do with how much fluctuation you as a player have for your inputs as a generality. And sometimes, not only does this matter for ranges, it just matters for all sorts of other things. One of the infamous situations that comes up, and partially why our boxer bot is built the way it is, doing your combo from neutral jump is not usually the same as doing your combo from jump in. Even if your jump in buttons tend to all be the same, if you neutral jump into something for various very complicated reasons, especially if your jumping neutral attack hits behind you and it's a cross-up, the timing is going to be different enough that you have a chance of dropping the combo purely because you started it from a neutral jump button instead, even though there's nothing otherwise different about the combo at all. You can try it out, maybe you're not one of the people this affects, but I've seen it enough times to think, oh, this is something people actually have to care about.
The time has arrived. Come.
Skill color always reminds me of something, but I can't think of what it is.
Round 1. Fight.
Pyrokinesis. I shall persevere. Falter. The curtain falls. No. Hear my breath. This ice shall be your doom.
One of Cammy's biggest problems with characters like Gil and zoning jump style characters in general is actually that her anti-air doesn't work all that well. It causes a reset, but they're often high in the air when they do certain things, so the reset doesn't necessarily benefit her. And depending on their guesses and the fact that they have way more health, they can afford to take bigger risks after the scramble of the anti-air, and that means they get to jump more often. Now, of course, you can solve this problem by sometimes going for the air throw, and sometimes just, using cannon spike, as you generally should. But you can't be ready for that all the time, especially when you otherwise train to get the back heavy punch anti-air. Gil isn't a character who otherwise wastes a lot of energy, so you can't be sure you're going to need one thing or another. One good way to think about it is simply switch your anti-air mental space based on whether or not you are neutral or at close range before you needed to do it. This you can practice against multiple bots, Lara being a good one, and interestingly, Rose coming up to help with this now too. I don't think we've seen a lot of Cammy versus Rosebot work done, because generally, while we do have to check most characters, Cammy versus Rosebot and Kareem versus Rosebot aren't necessarily sufficiently different that we care to check it in detail. I'm pretty confident it works out fine, but that also means that she hasn't necessarily had a lot of time to practice Cammy versus Rosebot, and therefore versus this sort of thing. That is not in... I have probably never seen that win quote before. I feel like that translation is one of those complex feelings from Japanese that you can't really capture in English properly, but I probably should find somewhere where I can see it to figure it out. Mostly that grateful isn't exactly the feeling, that word I'm expecting that actually was there originally. But still, not all that far off. Gil is really susceptible to that forward heavy kick. For various reasons, Gil has all sorts of problems with Cammy's forward heavy kick. It allows her to play more defensively, oddly, because Gil can't afford to hit certain buttons at all.
I shall persevere.
And his best bet is to mostly stick out light punch and light kick in neutral to prevent the problem of having to deal with it. This is mainly because Gil normally relies on pushing opponents to places where they can't do much, except do something very risky. But Cammy doesn't necessarily have to do anything risky. The move isn't terribly risky for her, particularly against Gil. It solves so many of her problems that I would suggest Gil players to spend a lot of time figuring out how to beat the situation that this move causes, because you can't even necessarily move. A neutral jump might help, but even that sometimes gets clipped and it's just confusing. You can try to armor through it with your other stuff. It might help. It's often not enough. So, if you are a Cammy player, remember that. If the Gil player is not being particularly defensive, you get to hit forward heavy kick a lot. And while you will take damage for it when you do mess it up, assume that this will be in your favor 3 out of 4 times, and it combos really easily, so you're going to get at least enough damage off it to make the other player stressed about it. And again, that's why we're having this discussion today. It could just be difficult enough to deal with it that your opponent has to devote more thought, and if they have to devote more thought to it, you get to do your other very basic walk forward, stand medium punch, dive kicks at perfect spacing, all of those things that Gil normally has really good answers to get overridden by you hitting forward heavy kick enough to make him think about the fact that his answers don't always work.
Nikali.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight!
This matchup actually becomes harder for our Cammy because of a reduced amount of mid-range control. Nikali has enough ways to challenge and damage Cammy for just hitting stand medium kick and forward heavy kick that it's kind of a problem. But you still have to hit those things, and you have to do it for the same reason that it comes up against Gil. Nikali gets to defend and wait for Cammy to make a specific type of mistake too much if you never hit them. And yes, sometimes you will take damage for hitting them, but this is a pretty good example of the core principle of what we're talking about today. If you think, well, if I hit these I'm going to get hurt, I should rely on this other thing. You don't necessarily have another thing to rely on. Most players faced with this situation, if they aren't super daring or if they care a lot about losing, they'll retreat, they'll try to play even more defensively, but Arnicali certainly knows how to get in your face and cause you problems. So it comes up more that they have to think about it. But when you're dealing with players who are likely to keep on trying to do things, if they don't think about it, they'll end up doing the thing that the opponent is waiting for, or doesn't even have to wait for it. It just has so many ways to go wrong, just by the natural movement of the opposing character, that you die. So it helps a lot because you get to do things like jumping, you get to do things like countering specific types of approaches they might want to make.
Round 2. Fight.
And yeah, you might be hurt, but you're not necessarily going to be hurt that much, as you've just seen. There's various reasons why the interactions usually lead to little scrambles that you don't necessarily care about. This is something that happens in real martial arts as well. You sometimes just need to see if your opponent can do something fast enough to get the space they need. Because if you realize, wait, you don't actually throw that punch well, or you're gonna get tired of the effort to throw that particular punch way faster than I'm gonna get tired of getting little pokes by it. This is a thing that comes up for boxers a lot because you have to be trained to literally take certain punches. Not necessarily because you plan to get yourself jabbed until you're unconscious. And we've recently seen, I believe, someone in UFC who really does just jab you until you lose. But the counter to that is to keep your guard up. It's not really a matter of having to think through a ton of things. Looks like we are around to our Nikali mirror, and this match has nothing to do with our theme for today, so I'm probably not going to say anything at all.
Let's do this. Round white. Round 2. Fight. Necalli wins. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight! Final round. Fight! Necalli wins. Round 1. Fight! round. Fight! Necalli wins. Let's do this. Round one.
Sweet! You got it! Sweet! Look at that! Sweet! Sweet! Ah, sucker! Ha! Kaboom! It's time for pain! Slap! Sucker!
Round two. Fight!
Yeah! Yeah! Get lost! Yeah! Sweet! I got it! Ha ha! Go down! Get lost! Ah, sucker! Tornado sweet! Tornado! It's time for pain!
Necalli wins. Round one. Fight!
Tornado!
match is kind of hard to comment on properly. Cody's matchup against Nikali involves properly using a lot of meter, but this is a good V skill for the purpose, as a lot of Nikali's stuff is easy to stop on reaction with Cody's V skill. Mainly because you only have to hit one button and it covers all of the possible options that Nikali has at the same spacing. But of course, you generally don't want to risk using it and getting punished when you don't have to. Still, it has a nice long animation which really helps when it comes to doing certain things in this matchup. Basically, that really long animation helps because Cody can get out of a lot of things that would otherwise seem like setups without moving his own character too much. Like, Cody's body does not move when he does these counters enough that it benefits Nikali. And you just get things like that, the backward jump with the long strike to get hits when he's in the corner. There's some definite good options here. But none of them are truly discouraging to Nikali's attacks, which is probably Cody's biggest problem in the matchup. You can't really get Nikali to stop attacking. You can only counter when he attacks wrong. From Nikali's side, oddly enough, one of your better options is to use the offensive V-reversal because Nikali's V-reversal is good enough at setting up these situations. And it puts more and more pressure on your opponent to do things the way that would help. I'm not sure if they were going for super there, because I think I would have gone for super there, but that is a lot of health and probably would not have chipped.
Let's do this.
Another Nikali mirror, although this time I might have something to say later on.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Necalli wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Necalli wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Be on guard.
Necalli.
See you, Kitana.
Round one. Fight!
probably the right decision on both sides. One can go for the pressure, the other can go for the super. The problem here is that it ends up in that situation, a little scrambly afterward, a little unclear.
You win.
Cammy has slight advantage, but one mistake from her end will lead to a lot of health loss. So it's more like Nikali can take one hit and Cammy can take two, because Cammy must attempt to do things to get that one hit that allows Nikali to finish her in two.
Fight.
Top level players actually keep really close track of all this, to the point where they even know like exactly how much health it takes, which interactions will lead to them being able to get a finish with X meter. When you play the game enough, all of these little things come in. It's like speed running. You learn tiny aspects of different interactions that come up so often that you might as well memorize or learn some of them.
Round two. Fight.
I gotta admit, for a costume it made very little sense relative to the character. This one grew on me a lot. The Nikali one specifically. That sort of situation is always a hard one to be in, because once you are pushed to that level, you never know when you should actually use the EX move. Your opponent is probably baiting it. But then you are really playing through the back and forth of how many times can I do this before I need to bait it? Unfortunately, once you're cornered to that level, after the first two successes, the person doing the pressure doesn't necessarily have a good reason to stop, other than a sense, which means your chances of them continuing to do it are higher than they normally would be. If they were at a meaningful disadvantage or nearly about to die, they might do it only twice and hope for the best and try to beat you in neutral after they've managed to sort of set back the situation. But if they've got a big life lead, they don't have any real risk they're taking, especially if you don't have a ton of meter. So they don't really have any specific reason why they should stop. They can stop simply because they're pretty sure that you're thinking that, but they don't have to. Is that forward heavy kick doing its work again?
Round two. Fight. You win.
That was a whiff punish one was more likely to be ready for. And it's also the end of our stream for tonight. You can find our new Rose bot at 2-mk.org, and all of the information on when we're streaming. We're planning to cut down on it a little bit at our Twitter 2_mk_FGC. This lounge is likely to close up pretty soon, so I wouldn't necessarily suggest joining it. Overall, It's been pretty good tonight. This has been Rillian, 14 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.